Hey there, what's happening, everybody? Welcome. This is Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, episode 583. Today, Andrew and I are talking about whether or not martial arts school owners are or should be responsible for the conduct of their students outside of class. I have a feeling this one might ruffle some feathers. I've said that before. I like ruffling feathers. Makes you guys think. Well, first off, if you want to check us out and see the collective glare off of Andrew's skull and mine, we are on YouTube. And of course, you might be listening to this in audio. Most of you listen to this rather than watch, but you can watch if you want to see our facial expressions. It's super intense. I mean, Andrew's making faces right now. But I haven't introduced myself. I'm Jeremy Lesniak. I'm your main host here for the show. I'm the guy that, I've put everything I have into this organization, this company, Whistlekick, because I love traditional martial arts. And so what does that mean? Well, go to whistlekick.com. You'll see what that means. You'll see all the things that we're working on, including some of the things that we sell. We've got a store. Yes, because we've got to cover bills. And what's the easiest way to cover bills? We sell you a thing. You give us some money for the thing, and it goes to cover some of our expenses. And if you use the code podcast15, that'll save you 15% on whatever thing or things you decide to pick up. Now, if you want to check out the show on its own website, whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. Our goal of this show is to connect and educate and entertain traditional martial artists around the world, no matter what style you are. And so that's why you're going to find every episode we've ever done at that website. You can find them all over the place. We don't put anything behind a paywall. And at the website, you're going to find links and transcripts and photos and videos, all kinds of cool stuff. And it's all to support you, the traditional martial artist. If you want to help us out, you can make a purchase, but you could also share an episode. You could leave a review somewhere. You could tell friends about what's going on. Follow our social media. We're at Whistlekick, or you could support the Patreon, patreon.com/Whistlekick, patreon.com/Whistlekick. For as little as $2 a month, you can show your appreciation. The more you throw our way, the more exclusive content. Yes, I mean that exclusive content we're going to give back to you, whether it's drafts of programs or books or behind the scenes on this show. The only place you're ever going to find out what upcoming episodes we have, it's through Patreon. So consider that if you value what we do. Andrew, what's going on, man?
Not a whole lot. How are you today, Jeremy?
I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent.
This is a spicy topic.
Yeah. You said potentially ruffle some feathers. I think we will ruffle less feathers than you think.
I like ruffling feathers.
I know you do.
Because it means people are thinking
and engaging themselves in deep thought, which is good.
I think it's important. When I think about the goals of the show, it's not for me to say, oh, this is what you need to think. I think I've been pretty clear about that over the years. I never just want to just smash knowledge into people's brains. I want them to hear what we say and then consider it. And if that doesn't change anybody's mind, that's totally fine, as long as you're willing to have your mind open to being changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And this topic came to us. I didn't come up with this topic myself. This was actually brought to us, which is also something I want to throw out there. Like, we love that. Yeah. I personally love it when someone else says, here's an idea. Maybe you guys want to discuss this. And maybe the answer is, well, thank you. Yeah, we might. We might not, but this particular topic came in, and it was stemmed from this person who we all both know. Everybody listening
to the show.
All both of us, and everyone. If you've listened to the show for any point in time,
everybody listening knows.
You have heard of or know of the infamous Leslie, who helps us with all of our scheduling.
I don't know if she wants to be infamous, but she's definitely critical.
She's not just infamous, she's infamous.
Oh,
she's she's there.
So much more. Yeah. It's for those of you who may be new to the show, if you're hearing Leslie's name for the first time, she is the behind the scenes. She's a producer on the show, and she does a phenomenal job. Really appreciate all the work that she does.
And is a great person.
Yeah, great person, great martial artist. I mean, she's a good friend. I really value. It's nice when you get to work with your friends.
Absolutely.
Like what we're doing here.
Like today. So she brought forth question? So she had been watching the newest season of Cobra Kai. And Jeremy, I'm assuming you have seen.
I have watched the entirety of season 3. Yes.
Okay, as have I. And for any listeners out there, we're not going to specifically get into any spoilers at all, but there are some things that the students of martial arts within this show do that are not good, shall we say.
Yep.
And so her thought was, should their instructors be responsible for the bad things that these students are doing?
Yeah.
And that's the premise of our discussion today.
Yeah. And the thing I want people to know, and if you're watching, you're wondering why I'm looking down. I'm looking up on my phone. This is one of the things that it's a little different with the video versus audio, where we get to edit or you don't see my face. We had John Hurwitz, who was the head writer, kind of the spearhead behind Cobra Kai on for episode 514. I was getting that number so I can put it in my notes. And I don't want anyone to think that as we talk about this subject that we are saying anything really negative about the show, because one of the things I like, well, I shouldn't speak for you, Andrew, but I don't think there's anything wrong in pointing out either flaws in a creative subject, which is not what we're doing. We're talking about the fictional aspects of the story. And if they were real, here are some things that we would feel strongly or moderately about in the conduct of the characters, who would then be, of course, be real people. Human beings are flawed, characters are flawed. And so we're really going to be talking about the characters and some of their conduct as if they were real people.
Well, and I don't know that we could even do this entire conversation and never mention Cobra Kai from here on out, because my thought wasn't we're going to dissect what the specific students in the show did, though we could do that. It's more of just a general thought. Should I be responsible for something one of my students goes out and does?
Yeah, and there is such a can of worms there, and I think that if we're going to start, we've got to do as we have been doing for the last few times we've done this, and started to cut things up and look at them in segments, because there are examples that we can use, and some of them are more extreme than others. So let's start with what I can think of as the most extreme example of someone comes to a single class, you teach them how to punch, how to make a fist, how to throw a front kick. They go out and they punch somebody in the face, and that person was never planning on coming back to a second class. Are you responsible as an instructor?
Well, short of me telling that first-time student in class, I want you to go out and punch that person in the face, I would say no.
And I would agree. I think ultimately we are all responsible for our own actions. And that's where I'm gonna draw a hard box around that statement. If I do something, I am responsible for that action. But it does not mean I'm the only one responsible. It does not mean that outside influence is irrelevant, because it is. And here's another extreme example. If I have a 3-year-old who is looking to me for input, martial arts or otherwise, and I give them a stick and tell them to go hit another 3-year-old, and they don't have the judgment to determine that's not a good idea, that 3-year-old is responsible, but I'd say I'm more responsible in that case, because my influence over them is probably greater than their own influence over themselves at that age.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much running through, there's a lot of context that would go into this type of thing. And, one of the biggest thing for me is how much does the instructor know?
What do you mean by know?
If I'm a martial arts instructor, which I mean I am, but I'm not. I don't own my own school, so I don't have my own students. So everything I say here is hypothetical. But I have a class, whether this person comes in for their first class or they've been with me for 6 months or a year. If they come into the dojo and I have no idea of what they are doing out on the street, let's say this particular student has been going out and vandalizing property or specifically using their martial arts training to beat people up, but I don't know anything about it. Am I responsible for what this student does? I think in the first initial moment, I would say no.
Hmm.
Now, the minute that I find out that they're doing this and I continue to instruct them, then I think I'm culpable.
Right. When we think about, I know little bits of this stuff, and honestly, this probably comes from watching Law and Order more than anything else. But when they talk about crime on that show, they talk about means, motive, and opportunity. And I think we could apply that same sort of metric here. If we're thinking about, is someone responsible? Maybe crime is too strong of a word, but did something take place that was wrong? Or if we're passing a judgment on this, because that's what a crime is. We're deeming that something is judged to be incorrect per the values of society. It's why it's called a judge, sitting up on that in that big chair, right? It's judged. Means, motive, opportunity. Means the student has come in, you have the ability to influence them. Motive, you have a desire to lead them in a certain direction. And opportunity, are they willing to listen to you? And maybe you could flip means and opportunity depending on how you look at it. But I think those are really the three pieces.
Yeah.
Do I have access to the student? Are they willing to listen to what I tell them? And am I trying to lead them in a direction? Because you could teach martial arts strictly from the mechanical perspective. I don't know anyone that does this, but it could be done where it's just, here is how you punch, here is how you kick. I'm not going to give you any context on when to use that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's motive, right? If someone comes in and, let's go back to that first example, they come in day one and I tell them, here's how you punch and kick. I don't tell them, don't punch and kick people that aren't trying to harm you. And they go off and punch and kick people who aren't trying to harm them. My degree of responsibility, I think in society is probably minimal to zero. But if I'm a decent instructor, if I care, I probably feel terribly.
Sure, absolutely. I would agree. You'd feel horrible, as would I. But would one realistically consider that my fault or your fault? I think the answer would be no.
I probably not. But because of that potential scenario and the realization of, as far as I know, every martial arts instructor on the planet, they recognize that what they're teaching has a combative element, whether it's
absolutely,
some hardcore self-defense school or Tai Chi. I would imagine every instructor understands that there is a martial aspect to it. It's a martial art, and they understand, okay, there are some disclaimer type things that I've got to get out of the way. And one of them is, you don't use this unless you need to use it. Now, of course, different schools, different instructors are going to take that in different directions. But I think for the sake of our discussion, we have to draw some line in the sand somewhere. And I think in this case, it's that generic disclaimer that I have heard in those words at multiple schools. You do not use what we teach you unless you need it to protect yourself or someone else.
Yep. And sometimes it's in the registration form you may fill out for the school. Yes. Like you're agreeing to only use this if you're absolutely, necessary and needed.
Yep. So then the situation that we are talking about is someone we've got a split here. You brought up the example of vandalism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of martial arts going on in vandalism. I mean, you could kick through a window, but
destroy property.
I don't know that how much that matters. So for the sake of argument, I think we need to exclude, for time's sake,
sure,
non-combative conduct.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's such a huge can of worms. We've talked on this show. I think everyone knows my feelings. I'm fairly certain you're on the same page. I am, Andrew, that I believe martial artists are better people. I believe further martial arts training makes people better. So if we look at it from that aspect, then one could make an argument that poor social conduct outside of combative aspects, self-defense, is still relevant in the development of a martial arts student. But it's so nuanced, we're not going there today. we're
Sure.
going to limit our conversation strictly to fighting. Let's call it fighting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's what happens in Cobra Kai. That's what happens when we're talking. If it was as it needed to be, it would be self-defense. But we're talking about fighting. So when I reframe this subject to you and I say, should a martial arts instructor be responsible if their students go out and get into fights? That carries a different tone. And what's your initial response there?
Again, I have to go back to, do I know about it? If I don't know, if I have no idea that my students are going outside and beating up people, how could I possibly be held culpable for that? Now, again, if I go tell my students to go mess with other people, right? Maybe whether it's in school and bullying them or out on the street, if I tell my students to go beat someone up, well, then yes, absolutely. I think I should be held responsible for that. But if I have zero idea, is that my fault? I would make the argument no.
Excuse me. And I agree. Who gets to determine then what is self-defense? This episode will come out after the 2 episodes that we've done on appropriate use of force. We had the internal discussion with us, and then we had the follow-up episode with Sergeant Hamilton, where we unpacked that a little bit more from a legal side. So in this case, who gets to decide? In theory, the only relevant person in the conversation that was there is the student.
Correct.
Do we trust the student to make the determination? And I'm going to say we have to, because otherwise we shouldn't be teaching them.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. I think the minute that I find out that my student is out there beating people up and getting into fights, I think from there, now I become responsible going forward. So if that student comes back to the dojo or dojang or my training facility, and I continue to teach someone who I know is intentionally going outside and beating people up, I feel like I am responsible. That is on me. That violence I am now a part of.
I would agree. You are maybe not legally responsible, but you are responsible if you continue to teach them in such a way that there is a reasonable belief that they will continue those actions.
Yep.
This is why so many martial arts schools, and to be honest, all of them that I've ever participated in that I'm aware of, had a 1-strike policy. If we learn that you are using what we teach you in a way that it is inappropriate and it is deemed to be obviously inappropriate, you will be expelled. Because that threat has to be there. I think not just for fear out of the student, because there's a consequence there, but I think also for the culture. I think the culture of the school has to understand that. And if we think about Cobra Kai, none of the schools that are discussed bring that up at all that I recall.
No, I don't believe so either. And there's some pretty serious violence between the 2 schools' students that happens within the show. And you can't make the argument that at least the Cobra Kai students, their instructor absolutely knew what was going on.
Yes.
And you could make the argument, I would have to go back through and watch season 2 again because it has been a while, but I don't believe that Daniel had the knowledge that his students were. I think that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I very well may be. And if you're listening, if you're like, you're wrong, well, tell me, that's okay. But I believe Daniel was kept in the dark about the violence that was happening with the students. His daughter Samantha.
Season 2, yeah, if I recall.
He did not realize what was going on through season 2. And so you could make the argument he shouldn't be held responsible. But moving forward, you'll have to watch season 3 to find out what happens.
Right. Now, so far we have only talked about the initiation of the fight, who is starting it versus who is defending themselves. But I think we also have to consider, here's this phrase again, the appropriate use of force.
Mm-hmm.
And was there an opportunity similar to extract oneself? If you pick a fight with me and I break your arm and then I break your other arm, it's probably unnecessary.
I would agree, but I think that's a different topic, because we're discussing, if my student does that, if you get into a fight with my student, you start the fight and my student breaks both of your arms, am I, as the teacher, responsible? That's the question.
I think those are along the same line. I do.
Really? Okay.
Because if I'm think of what has to happen for that breakdown to occur. Not only do I have to not understand or not take to heart the concept that the use of what I learn in my training is for my own defense and only for my own defense, right? We've talked about this, and honestly, it goes back before we did that other episode.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before. It's come up a number of times over the years that we've been doing this show. This idea, the cliche is, if I get the opportunity to run away, I need to. I should, right? That is safely run away.
Yep, I would agree.
So I think it's all along the same lines. If I have a student and that student, if somebody picks a fight with them and my student goes way overboard, I mean, let's take it to the most extreme, kills the other person unnecessarily, am I responsible? And I'm going to say yes, because I gave that student skill that they did not have the, what's the word I'm looking for? The maturity to properly utilize.
Yeah. And there's so much nuance within there,
Yes.
which we discussed at length with Sergeant Hamilton about what would have been appropriate. There's so many different factors that that would have to be determined as to whether it was appropriate or not, that it's difficult. It's difficult to me. It's difficult for me to say definitively, yes, it would be my fault. Yeah. Because there's just so many variables.
Sure. I get that. Where I'm coming from as I'm looking at this whole situation, it's my responsibility as an instructor, and I, like you, I do not have a formal school. I do not have students of my own. I have, and this was something that weighed on my mind. And I also, still teach periodically to schools I am part of, as well as, schools I am not part of. And I am hyper aware that if I teach something that has a violent, combative element to it, I need to be aware of the context. I am not going to teach eye gouges and, I don't know, clawing at throats to 4-year-olds.
Sure.
It's again, there's an extreme example because it's a little easier to see. I need to set the tone. If I'm teaching something that is violent, when is it being used? Why is it being used? What are the things you're watching out for? One of my fundamental beliefs is that if you get to the point where violence has occurred, there is a 99% chance that you've done something wrong leading up to it.
Oh, I would agree.
You could have, you should have, you might have, right? There are all these hypotheticals. That's a whole different subject that we might tackle another time. But if I'm the instructor, here I think is the best test. If you are an instructor, and even if you're not a martial arts instructor, if you're a parent and you hear about your student, your child, someone that you have responsibility for their upbringing, whether it's in life or in the martial arts, and you hear about them having done something and you feel guilty, I think that's the clearest indication. Because we can bat nuance around, we can talk about that, and we can give 1,000 examples, and you could come up with 10,000 more.
Yep.
But if that guilt comes through, I think you are definitively responsible. What do you think?
But yeah, I would agree, because that guilt has to come from somewhere. Yep. It doesn't just randomly show up.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't feel guilty, that you haven't done something wrong.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't go the other way.
But I think the vast majority of martial arts instructors are good people who want to do the right thing, and they want their students to do the right thing, and they understand what we are saying, and they agree. I mean, there's a reason that it's a cliche. It's a cliche because most people subscribe to it. Here's another place for nuance. There are some dirtbags out there. Some dirtbags achieve rank in open schools, and they teach other people to be dirtbags. And that's literally the story that we're talking about within Cobra Kai. Dirtbags teach dirtbags who become dirtbag instructors and teach further dirtbag students. And yeah, some of this stuff starts to get walked back. Some of it starts to get analyzed. And in order for the philosophical discussions to take place, there needed to be this conflict. You know, we probably wouldn't be doing this episode without season 3 of Cobra Kai.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And so I think it leads to an important philosophical discussion. And my hope is that if you are a school owner and you haven't sat down with your students recently and had a good long talk about appropriate force and what self-defense means to you and what your responsibilities as students of this school are, I think you should.
I would agree.
I think it's something that should happen probably on at least an annual basis. I think those conversations are critical. We get so bogged down in the physical stuff that we miss opportunities to have conversations that speak to the why and help people understand their role as a martial artist, as students in a school.
I'm a firm believer that martial arts schools should not 100% be just learning how to kick and punch. I think there needs to be some level of discussion. And sometimes I remember in high school sitting down on a Saturday class for an hour and a half and never getting up off my butt for an hour and a half. And the instructor was just, I don't want to say lecturing because there was some back and forth, but like just talking. Sometimes it was about history, which we have gone at length to talk about, right, on this podcast. Sometimes it was about history and culture. Sometimes it was about self-defense and things of this nature. And I think that's important. I don't mean every single class, but a few times a year, I think it's appropriate.
I completely agree. This is where I see some schools, especially in children's classes, having conversations at the end, mat chats, or whatever phrase they're using for it. I think that's great. To have a conversation periodically to unpack a certain subject and make sure people hear it, because especially if you're younger, you don't need to hear something the first time, or you don't really get something the first time you hear it. There's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
You have to hear something repeatedly. If you've got small kids, telling them not to do something one time doesn't necessarily have any effect, right? You've got to tell them over and over, and sometimes over and over again in the same sentence.
Yep.
So if you're going to share that information, you've got to have a reasonable belief that those students are not going to abuse that knowledge. And let's go to an extreme example, a firearm, a gun. You don't give somebody a gun unless you think they can responsibly own and operate the gun. Punching and kicking is not nearly as extreme as a gun. It takes, it takes far more work to cause harm than with a gun, but the concept is still the same.
Yep.
If you wouldn't give your 5-year-old a gun and you wouldn't give your 5-year-old a knife, you probably shouldn't be teaching your 5-year-old eye gouges and groin grabs and other really extreme martial arts techniques.
Yep, exactly.
And notice I said probably. I'm not saying definitively, because nuance.
Yeah.
You just rename this the Nuance Podcast.
The Open Clear Communication Nuance Podcast.
I like it. So the question at this point is, have we missed anything?
I think the only thing to continue to consider is, if I, as the instructor, know bad stuff's happening and I continue to let it happen. That's the thing.
Let's hit that point, because you've brought that a couple times and I feel like I've steered the conversation away. So let's say you're the instructor and I'm the student, and you get wind. I've been training for, let's say, a few years. I'm some kind of middle to upper colored belt rank. I'm a blue, green, red, brown, something in there.
Yep.
I've spent enough time training. I should know better. You have indicated to me on multiple occasions as part of the group, you don't do this unless you need to, right? I have heard it. There is a
Yep.
reasonable expectation that I know I should not be causing harm with what I'm doing. And I go off and let's say I'm a high school age kid and I am getting purely verbal abuse from another kid. Okay. We're both 16, 17,
Mhm.
and, it's constant name calling, picking on me kind of a thing. And one day I don't just, pop him in the face, but I go to town. I take my frustration, my anger out
Yep.
on him. And it is very clearly that I was the aggressor and went pretty far with it.
Mhm.
So there's the situation. Now I'll kick it back to you.
Okay. In this type of situation, I think it would be important for the instructor to have a good, open discussion with you. So if you were my student, I would sit down and have a discussion with you. And I would, obviously, because you're 16, I would involve your parents. And I would have discussions on whether we should consider getting some a third party outside help, whether it's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, to talk about what you're going through. Clearly, you've been bullied, but I need to make sure that I have to have a reasonable assumption that this isn't going to happen again if I'm going to continue to keep you as a student.
Right.
My first inclination would be to not have you as a student unless you could prove to me that this was a one-time thing and you can learn how to get past or find other ways, which I would help you with, find other ways to work out that frustration that you had with this particular bully.
Now, here's the question, because I already have that information. You've taught me. I know how to punch and kick. I am reasonably competent. And now I have the satisfaction because I remember what it was like to be 16, 17, getting picked on. I I think even if I felt on some level it was wrong, there would be some satisfaction in stomping this bully.
Mm-hmm.
There's still kids I'm thinking of from high school who, you know what, wouldn't mind taking a couple shots on them. I'm well past high school age, but that's still there. If you cut me loose, now there's no guidance, and I still have that skill. So, is the cutting loose purely from a responsibility aspect, or might you still feel guilty, as we already said, has some indication of responsibility if I go off and do it again, because now there doesn't seem to be any consequence, no tie, no supervision with regard to that physical skill set.
Well, and again, that's why I would have had a sit down discussion with you to determine where you were at, and is this something that we can work through? I would rather keep you as a student, not for the financial reasons, but for the reasons you just mentioned. Like if you do leave and go off and continue to hurt people, I would feel guilty because I'm the one that gave you that ability to do that. So I would rather keep you and continue to teach you and be an instructor and a coach mentor,
Mhm.
to help guide you through that.
And I'm with you. I think this is one of those where trying to come up with a one size fits all is
Yeah,
just not going to happen. The specifics of the situation, the student, their home life, how long they've been training, etc. I think their mental state, I think, matters so much that we could come up with examples where throwing the kid out is the best choice,
Mhm.
or keeping the kid in is the best choice. To, hey, you and I are going to have a hard sparring match, and I'm going to let you take some of your frustration out on me
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I can take it.
I think the takeaway listeners should have from this episode is that if you're not having discussions with your students about this type of thing, you should be.
Yeah. The only way to head this off is through conversation. And if you limit that conversation to a few words here or there, assuming that you agree with us that this is an important lesson, think of the other important lessons you teach in martial arts. You don't teach them offhandedly once in a while. If learning how to punch is critical, you spend time teaching how to punch. If learning how to get out of a choke in part of your self-defense curriculum is important, you don't just do it once a year. You spend time, you drill it, you make sure your students know it. This is the same thing.
I would agree.
You want your students to be responsible with the material that you give them and make sure that they use it in the way that you deem most appropriate. You need to have that conversation with them, not just once, but frequently.
Agreed.
Anything else we should add?
Nope. No, I think that was good.
This was great. You know, one of the things I like is that this one came from Leslie. I think some of the last topic conversations we've had have come from listeners. So if listeners, you've got stuff, or viewers, because YouTube, if you've got questions or subjects that you want us to unpack, let us know. You know, maybe the two of us will tackle it. Maybe we'll bring a guest on to unpack it. You know, if it's something that requires some expertise that, you know, Andrew and I don't have.
Because I'm an expert in nothing.
I'm an expert in what I don't know. Actually, I don't even think I'm that. I don't know what I don't know. Whew. This is what happens when you get a couple nerds talking. Anyway, we do want to hear your topic suggestions, your questions. So go ahead, write in jeremy@whistlekick.com. I'll share it with Andrew and we'll go from there. Now, other things that you might want to be aware of, you can find us on social media. We're at Whistlekick everywhere, and that includes YouTube. You can follow our Facebook and Instagram and all that, right? You can support us by making purchases or Patreon or sharing episodes, telling friends, saying hi to people that wear Whistlekick stuff. You know, all of that is good. And we thank you. We appreciate you because, well, as I used to say, without listeners, I would just be a crazy guy talking to himself. But I think that's changed a little bit, at least in this case. Without listeners or viewers, I would just be hanging out, chatting about martial arts with a friend, which sounds far less consequential. So I don't think I'm going to say that again because nobody's going to give me any sympathy over that one. All right. Well, let's close it out. Andrew, until next time, train hard,
smile, and have a great day.